You see what sending out them negative waves did, Moriarty?
But oddball, I did try and tell them, but they won't listen. I tried.
Sure.
But I did try.
Oh, man. Don't hit me with them negative waves so early in the morning.
But I can't force them to listen. I can't.
Always with the negative waves, Moriarty. Always with the negative waves. Have a little faith, baby. Have a little faith.
But I keep trying. Oddball, I keep trying. But they won't listen. They won't tune in. They really won't.
Why don't you knock it off with them negative waves? Why don't you dig how beautiful it is out here? Why don't you say something righteous and hopeful for a change?
Tune in to Awake Radio for your positive wave.
No lizards. No aliens. No nonsense. This is Reality Bytes in association with Sovereign Independent UK and One World Chronicle.
You're listening to Awake Radio, straight talk for the awake and aware.
Welcome to Reality Bytes Radio on the 23rd of June 2014 at 8:05 in the evening. You're missing the World Cup, folks. Sorry about that, a little techie trouble at the start there, but never mind. And I still can't get into the chat box, so sorry I didn't respond to you, Zeets. I can't do anything about it. I type into the chat box, it appears on my computer, I'm logged into the chat box, but it doesn't seem to show up anywhere. But there you go. All right, topics, many and varied as usual. But I had a chat with somebody the other day there, and they wanted the podcast that was played at the end of Thursday's rather busy show, shall we say. And the gentleman who made that podcast, a guy called Stephen Mosher, I've been in touch with him, and hopefully he'll get back to me and come on the show. And he's an expert on why overpopulation is a complete farce. So hopefully he'll be coming on to give the facts to disprove Mr. Galilee's eugenics, delusional, brainwashed attitude. Anyway, okay. Mail Online, 20th of June. How Britain was sold down the river. A Grimsby fisherman and a new set of European rules that stopped him catching a Dover sole for supper. Grimsby was once the busiest fishing port in the world, boasting a fleet of 700 trawlers. It was killed by the Icelandic cod wars of the early 70s and the EU's common fisheries policy. Britain's fishing industry was sacrificed on the altar of Edward Heath's desperation to join the old common market at any cost, which of course he ran his election campaign saying he wouldn't do that. But we all know about Edward Heath and his predilection for little boys on his boat and his close association with Jimmy Savile, so it's no wonder he had to sign on the dotted line, eh? Our traditional waters were handed over to foreign factory ships in exchange for a place at the subsidised lobster supper tables of Brussels. Today there are just 5 trawlers operating out of Grimsby, a third of the number of boats servicing offshore wind farms in the Humber estuary. Tens of thousands of men lost their jobs when their boats were decommissioned. One of the casualties was Ernest Bubbs Cromer, a former trawler skipper. I also know when boats were decommissioned in Ireland and Scotland at the time of the tsunami down in the Far East, and the fishermen wanted to sail their boats there and give them away, and they weren't allowed to. They smashed them up. So much for helping out the poor, eh? Bubbs, as he's known by everyone, is now 76 and recovering from prostate cancer and a knee replacement operation. He retains his love of the sea and fishing. His daily exercise consists of walking 60 yards out into the estuary to inspect a net tethered on the mudflats to catch fish on the incoming tide. It's a method which has been used by locals on the banks between Grimsby and Cleethorpes for generations. On a good day he might catch 2 Dover sole weighing about £1 each, enough for a decent dinner for himself and his wife Kirsten. See, that's called self-sufficiency, isn't it? Some days the net is empty, but if he catches more than a couple of fish, he gives them away to friends and neighbours. By no means is this a commercial operation. Until fairly recently, there were about 15 nets pegged out in the flats. Bubbs had been back for a while because he was recuperating from his surgery. Happily, his doctor has now told him he can start to take regular exercise again. Earlier this week, at low tide, Bubbs returned to the estuary to check his net. He was approached by 2 beach safety officers in high-vis jackets, naturally riding beach buggies. Very environmentally friendly, eh? They said he would have to remove his net or it would be confiscated and destroyed. Bubbs was told he was in breach of the new bylaw and was advised to ring the North Eastern Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority for further information. When he rang, they said, I was in contravention of some regulations so-and-so from 2013, and if I didn't remove my net from the beach, they would do it for me. I couldn't understand it. People have been fishing this stretch since time immemorial, certainly as long as I can remember. I've had no problem in the past, so why now? Well, it's called Agenda 21, Bubbs. Bubbs emailed me. He'd read last week's column about an 83-year-old man persecuted by Greater Manchester Police for giving his infirm wife a pain-killing patch, headlined Modern Britain, No Country for Old Men. I thought I might be interested in his plight. No country for old men is about right. That's exactly how I feel about this. What are we supposed to do? Go away and die? Well, yes, Bubbs, that's the general idea. And I'll be getting onto some of that later. I decided to investigate. On the authority's website there's a picture of its chief officer, David McCandless, and an invitation to ask the chief a question by email. So I did expect it to disappear into a bureaucratic black hole. The following morning I received a personal reply from Chief McCandless. I was impressed. Most people in his position hide behind a battalion of PR officers. You're right there. He explained it was his job to enforce laws relating to fish conservation between the Tyne and the North Lincolnshire coast. One such regulation relates to the management of fixed engines or nets and has been in force since the 90s. Specifically, it protects and conserves migratory species such as salmon and eels in the estuarine and marine environment and other marine species from over-exploitation. A couple of Dover sole for your suppers over-exploitation, eh? Maybe he's exploiting the fish by putting them to work or something. In doing so, it prohibits the setting of any type of fixed net in the Humber, specifically in the intertidal zone. We received an inquiry from a member of the public this morning seeking guidance on the application of that regulation, and that guidance was supplied. The regulations apply across the board to everyone, and we have to apply them fairly and evenly to all stakeholders. But they go out with a big huge trawler and just catch as much as they want, can't they? As long as they're doing it for the big boys. I appreciate that Chief McCandless has a job to do, but if the rules have been in place since the 90s, why are they only being applied now? Well, because they're really going to come down hard on you folks, and you're not going to be allowed to live anywhere near the coast to fish anyway. That would explain why before Bubs began his treatment there were 15 nets in the mudflats, and now there's only his left. Obviously there's been a concerted operation over the past 6 months to clear out local fishing and mudflats. Why? What harm are they doing? Between them they can only have been catching a few dozen fish every week. Bubs points out that just along the estuary there's a power station which kills tons of immature fish every year by sucking them into its water cooling intake. This, on the face of it, another story of the little man being crushed by an overbearing bureaucracy, but it is much, much more than that. It's about how we are governed, how short-term political obsession takes priority over people's best interests, and how our way of life has been changed irrevocably by our membership of the European Union. The bylaw which bans Bubs from casting his net for Dover sole may have been signed by a British civil servant, but it will have had its origins in a directive from Brussels, and from the United Nations, of course. Fish conservation in Humber wouldn't even be necessary had the politicians not handed over our traditional waters in the North Sea to foreign fleets who hoovered up everything on an industrial scale. Stocks of cod, haddock and other species were harvested virtually to extinction. Well, I don't believe that either. I think there's plenty of fish out there, and we've just been lied to on that as well. The destruction of the British fishing industry is one of the greatest betrayals in our history. During World War II, the only food not on ration was fish and chips. That was because brave fishermen from Grimsby and elsewhere risked life and limb to bring home the catch from treacherous waters in constant danger of being sunk by enemy warships and submarines. The reward in their own lifetime was to watch impotently as politicians such as the ghastly grocer Heath sold them out in the cause of the doomed ideal of creating a European superstate, which is just what Hitler wanted, wasn't it? They had to stand back and watch their boats being burned while British waters were plundered by foreign fishermen with the collaboration of their own government. What would these men make of the once proud port of Grimsby today? All you need to know about modern Britain is that there are 3 times more boats servicing utterly useless and expensive wind farms in the Humber estuary than there are actually catching fish, and the wind farms don't even work. Instead of boasting the world's greatest fishing fleet, we are employing high-vis wardens on beach buggies to stop redundant trawler skippers like Bubs Cromer from netting a couple of Dover sole for the dinner table. Not for the first time over the past weeks have I had cause to reflect on what my father's generation would think of the nation they fought so gallantly to defend. No country for old men. You can say that again. Well, I think they'd feel pretty betrayed, really, wouldn't you? But here's David Cameron trying to act the big man again. Blow to David Cameron as EU snubs British demands for reform. The Prime Minister's demands for European treaty change and powers to flow back from Brussels are ignored in a confidential EU blueprint to be discussed at summit amid row over Jean-Claude Juncker. This is all a sideshow, isn't it? David Cameron's hopes of reforming Britain's relationship with Brussels have been dealt a blow after a confidential blueprint setting out the European Union's priorities for the next 5 years fell far short of his demands for change. It's the old Soviet system, the 5-year plan, isn't it? The document obtained by the Telegraph will be given to the Prime Minister by Herman Van Rompuy, the puppets of the European Council, when they meet in Downing Street. It comes as Mr Cameron prepares to force a vote on the possible presidency of Jean-Claude Juncker. The Prime Minister has been attempting to block the appointment, but is increasingly resigned to defeat. Well, that's because he can't do anything about it. The document being given to Mr Cameron by Van Rompuy will further anger the Prime Minister ahead of a crucial Brussels summit where European leaders will discuss Mr Juncker's appointment, as if it hasn't already all been decided, eh? The 4-page document fails to deliver any of the substantial reforms that Mr Cameron could sell to a sceptical British public in return for accepting Mr Juncker, and hold out no prospect of even discussing EU treaty change or abolishing the legal commitment to an ever closer union. So what makes you think we're going to be allowed to leave, eh? It also fails to countenance Mr Cameron's key demand for national parliaments to be given a veto over European legislation. Well, that's what you signed up to, so you get on with it, eh? In March, writing for the Telegraph, Mr Cameron has set out 7 demands for EU reform, including the key proposal that national parliaments are able to work together to block unwanted European legislation. I don't think Mr Cameron could write a Christmas card, to be honest with you. I don't think he's writing for the Telegraph either. The document states the credibility of the Union depends on its ability to ensure that its institutions and member states follow up on decisions taken. They should produce tangible results and live up to their commitment to provide shelter to European citizens and to protect their rights, welfare and well-being. So with to protect your rights, welfare and your perception that you're okay. The most concrete reference to a British demand is a loose commitment to giving MPs more of a say in EU decisions. But it's a pledge that falls far short of Mr Cameron's call for groups of national parliaments to be given a veto over European legislation. Well, our MPs have no say in the European Parliament whatsoever, any more than the European Parliament MPs have any say in what goes on in the European Parliament. You've got 28, how would you call them, communist dictators sitting around a big table and they decide everything that goes on in our country and every other European country. So I don't know why we bother voting. Well, I don't anyway, but I don't know why anybody bothers voting, because none of those 28 people were voted for. A greater place should be given to national parliaments, including by strengthening their means of participating in the debate and making their voices heard in the decision-making process. Well, they can shout from the rooftops, but it ain't going to make any difference, because they just get ignored. More positively for Mr Cameron, the paper appears to criticise the EU Parliament for imposing Mr Juncker as Commission President on the basis that he was the Spitzenkandidat, or lead candidate of the European People's Party, EPP, that won most seats in elections across Europe last month. There is a need for efficient and legitimate European institutions. Well, you can say that again, but we've never had them. The complementary dual democratic legitimacy of the European Union through the directly elected European Parliament and the elected national governments in the Council needs to be fully respected, said the document. What a joke, eh? They ought to organise themselves accordingly. They have to work together in full respect of the treaties and of their respective roles. Their work should be guided by the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality. Well, they are all in it together, aren't they? They're all working together to bring us all down. Government reveals scale of online fight against jihadist propaganda. It's amazing, isn't it? The government can take stuff down that's regarded as propaganda, but only if it's against them. 15,000 items removed at government's request since December, and YouTube asked to take down video of Cardiff man in Syria. As many as 15,000 items of jihadist propaganda have been taken down from the internet due to government pressure since December 2013, the Prime Minister's spokesman has said. She revealed that the British government was pressing YouTube to take down a video posted 3 days ago by a Cardiff-born man now in Syria, calling for fellow British Muslims to join the war in Syria. She said the video should not be hosted by YouTube. It's none of her business, is it? The scale of the government activity may reflect an increase in British government monitoring or, alternatively, an increase in the number of such videos being posted in the UK. Either way, it represents a huge logistical problem for the government. Nasser Mutana, the 20-year-old medical student, can be seen in the Syrian video wearing a white turban and claiming that the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, ISIS, has fighters as far afield as Cambodia, Australia and the UK. His family from the Cardiff area said he had travelled to join the conflict with younger brother Asil, 17. Their father Ahmed Mutana said he is heartbroken that his son left the UK to fight in Syria and told The Guardian that they had betrayed Great Britain. Excuse me. We all know who's betraying Great Britain, eh? And there's nothing great about it either. I think we just mentioned one of them in the previous article, Mr Cameron. Excuse me again. Right, The Telegraph from today. Why I Love the BBC. Now, this is from the same guy who wrote the article, I think it was last week or the week before, on why we should give a damn about privacy. We should all just, give all our information away to whoever wants it. But this is why I love the BBC. Well, it probably pays him a big fat salary, or a backhander to write this garbage. The BBC upholds genuine British values at home and offers great PR for our country overseas. What's not to like? Asks Alex Proud. When I think about the things that are great about Britain, the BBC is always in my top three. In a country that seems to produce increasingly little of truly global brilliance, Auntie is like a reminder of our Victorian heyday. Yeah, slums. It is, dare I say, one of the few bits of modern Britain that would have Churchill raising his 10th port of the day and nodding in approval. Most of the time it provides us with honest, high-quality TV, radio and online news. Straightforward, intelligent coverage that we can trust. Voices and music we discuss around the water cooler. It entertains our kids without turning them into horrible little consumers, and it reminds us how history, drama and documentary should be. Its radio stations wake us up in the morning and enliven our car journeys. If we're far, far away, the World Service provides us with a comforting voice from home. The BBC is also one of the greatest exponents of British values. Since when was paedophilia a British value? There is, assuming that by British values you mean things like decency, fairness, humour and intelligence, rather than Humpty-Dumpty-ish political expedience. It's one of the few British institutions that still seems to embrace a multicultural Great Britain and show how it can work. And then there's the charmingly démodé stuff, whatever that means. Even though I'm not particularly interested in horticulture or God, I still regard programmes like Gardener's Question Time and Thought for the Day part of the national wallpaper. Only the Beeb would produce these, and they are part of the reason it is so utterly, deeply wonderful. The only other national institution I can think of that enjoys a comparable place in our collective national heart is the NHS. Unlike the NHS, the BBC is fairly cheap. Really? And isn't threatened by the growing demands of an increasingly obese, alcoholic and ageing nation. So, the BBC is wonderful, but the rest of us are just obese, alcoholic and ageing. Yeah. It is, however, routinely threatened by the type of free market fundamentalist who conveniently forgets that Ayn Rand ended her days on welfare. I wonder why he's mentioning Ayn Rand, eh? Maybe it's because Atlas Shrugged is seen as one of the elite's Bibles. You should read that, folks. Anyway, let's start with the money. As to invoke Oscar Wilde, the cost of the BBC is something all of its critics seem to understand. In 2012-13, the corporation's licence fee income was $3.66 billion. It also made another $1.45 billion from its commercial activities worldwide. Well, it's not supposed to be a commercial organisation, is it? So the cost per head of the population is around £58 a year. How do they work that out when people are paying $145.50 for the licence? For comparison, that's just under 3 months' worth of Sky's original bundle, or about 6 weeks of Sky's cheapest sports bundle. Now, I understand that no one makes you pay for Sky, but the point is the BBC does not cost very much, and what you do get for your money is fantastic. I was looking on Wikipedia and trying to work out how many channels and radio stations it provides. I gave up. Once you start to factor in regional news channels, it's just bewildering. There are too many. Yeah, you're right, there's too many. And that's before you throw in the fantastic news website, the horribly addictive iPlayer, and so on. Even so, I can sort of see the charge. Why should I pay for something that I don't use? But this is to attach far too much importance to a weird historical anomaly, the licence fee. I think we should scrap the ridiculous licence fee. It's hugely bureaucratic and anachronistic. Licence fee evasion is responsible for 10% of all magistrates' courts prosecutions, which is both absurd and expensive. So allocate the funds from taxes like everything else. So we've all got to pay for it, whether you've got a TV or not, eh? That's where this is going. We've all got to be taxed to pay it, so that's another 145 quid in your tax bill, whether you've got a television or not. Having an independent body set the amount that the Beeb needs and get politicians out of the picture. Well, how can you get politicians out of the picture when you're going to tax people? Yeah, you're right, Alan. I'm nearly thrown up trying to read this crap. This would get around the I shouldn't pay for it because I don't use it argument, because from hip replacements to Trident missiles, we all pay taxes for things we don't use. It would... it's sickening, isn't it? It would also nix all those migraine-inducing technical discussions about paying for iPlayer and watching stuff online. While we're on that, what I charge. I also agree that BBC should stop competing for lowest common denominator audiences. Dumb mass-market telly is one area the commercial channels do better. I'm not saying that all the Beeb's output should be entirely like BBC 2 or BBC 4, but it could probably cut back on its chat shows, game shows, reality TV and documentaries that are exploitative entertainment. Well, the whole of the BBC is exploitative, isn't it? And, they're certainly good at exploiting children in more ways than one. Basically, if a show has either victims or a lot of purple lighting and an audience of screaming morons holding up signs, the commercial channels could do it better. Okay, so with the recognition that the market can do some things better, let's move on to the free market's fundamentalist criticism, which is essentially that the state has no place in telly and that the Beeb needs to be bitch-slapped by the invisible hand of the market. I do recognise that the private sector does a very good and efficient job of providing many things, but there are also plenty of places where free markets and private companies don't work so well, like railways, health services, education, utilities. I suspect in years to come many Scottish Islanders will discover that a privatised postal service isn't much fun either. In TV, we also have plenty of examples of what the free market provides, and as anyone who has watched free-to-air US or Australian TV knows, it is not far off uniformly awful. Just like the BBC, isn't it? At home, in terms of private provision, we have ITV, which isn't the envy of the world, and Sky, which is a kind of state-sanctioned sports monopoly, despite undertakings that it wouldn't be. I know that the US cable has produced some great box sets, but here you are cherry-picking the very best of a market that's 6 times as big. And while the US does make Breaking Bad and The Wire, it also produces Fox News, Talk Radio, and a despair-inducing sea of brain-dead commercial squalor that is America's terrestrial TV. That TV, for good or for ill, leaks so far beyond national boundaries is another reason to celebrate the Beeb. I've already noted that the corporation earns $1.6 billion from sources such as foreign sales, but the intangible goodwill it generates from almost certainly dwarfs this. To take a small example, the World Service costs $250 million a year, and is listened to by 190 million people. Where? The World Service alone probably does more for Brand UK on a global stage than any number of awkward ministerial photo ops with foreign leaders. As global PR, the BBC is a bargain. And I'm not going to carry on reading any of this rubbish, because that's all it is. Welcome back to Reality Bytes Radio, and anybody listening to this is still a David Icke fan, well, you know, why? This is his job. This is what his job has been all along. And this is in the Telegraph today. Are we really being ruled by flesh-eating lizards? While many conspiracy theories are absurd, there's more truth to them than we might think, says Cambridge historian Richard Evans. We live in an age of conspiracy theories. They seem to be everywhere. No sooner does a major event occur than the conspiracy theorists get to work on it. 9/11, a plot by Mossad, the CIA or the US government, the moon landing staged in the American desert or in a television studio in order to fool everyone into thinking they were real, global warming, a myth invented by scientists to get big research grants for themselves and increase control over society. Conspiracy theories like this, almost everyone seems to agree, are more pervasive than ever, and one thing they seem to have in common is a deep suspicion of government. Well, why wouldn't you be suspicious of government? They're murdering us. So that's reason enough to be suspicious. We may be told officially that the MMR vaccine gives our children protection against dangerous diseases, but the conspiracy theorists know that it causes autism, a fact they allege is being covered up by a conspiracy hatch between government and medical scientists. It's widely argued that the coming of the internet has been the main force behind the spread of such theories, and that they're undermining trust in political systems, even causing people increasingly to question the fundamentals of our democracy. In the US, for example, trust in President Barack Obama has been undermined by the spread of the idea that he and the Democrats have conspired to cover up the fact that he was not born in America and was therefore not eligible for election. The Bilderberg Group of senior world statesmen is, it's believed, a cover for the creation of a new world order in which national democracies are being replaced by a global dictatorship. Well, firstly, his first bit of lies, and this is the Bilderberg Group of senior world statesmen, is nothing of the sort. You know, it's the corporations and our puppet politicians that are there. It's nothing to do with world statesmen. Prime Minister David Cameron is allegedly part of the plot, connected through his wife's stepfather to the sinister forces behind it, including the Freemasons and the Illuminati. And did you know that the Queen and the entire British government, indeed the ruling elite of the world, are in fact flesh-eating green lizards from outer space, conspiring to take over the globe and concealing their true identity by disguising themselves as humans? Thank you very much, David Icke, for that. These are only a few of the conspiracy theories that are swirling around the internet, propagated through books and articles, and endlessly discussed in pubs and bars in countries all over the world. Conspiracy and Democracy, an interdisciplinary project I founded with colleagues in Cambridge, brings together historians, political theorists, philosophers, anthropologists and internet engineers to investigate this phenomenon. 1.5 years into the project, we are beginning to find our way towards some answers, and your controlled opposition, obviously. Allow me to address 5 widespread beliefs about conspiracy theories. 1, that they are a new phenomenon. 2, that they are the product of the internet. 3, that they belong in the realm of fantasy and are always a product of a paranoid imagination. 4, that they are particularly prevalent in democracies. And lastly, that they are all fundamentally follow the same patterns and structures of thought. So are they a new phenomenon? As soon as we start to look at history, we immediately have to recognise that they are not. There have always been conspiracies. Ever since human society came into being, some of its members have gathered together in secret for some illicit purpose they wish to conceal from society as a whole. Secrecy is an essential element. Not only must nobody know the purpose of the conspiracy or the identity of its members, they must not even know it exists. It has to be, to borrow the categories invented by former US Defence Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, an unknown. And as long as there have been conspiracies, there have been conspiracy theories. The French Revolution of 1789 to 94, for example, was permeated by them, from Robespierre's accusations that his enemies were conspiring with the British to overthrow the revolution, to the so-called Great Fear, when peasants were inspired to rise up and attack landowners in the belief that there was an aristocratic plot to murder them. Nothing changes, does it? Nothing changes. They're still at it today. Before that, political life under the French monarchy was shot through with rumours about plots and machinations behind the scenes. Even seemingly stable political systems have been prone to such beliefs, secret societies and conspiracies. The Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli lamented in 1856, "Cover Europe like a network. Acting in unison with a great popular movement," he went on, "they may destroy society as they did at the end of the last century." Well, he was right, wasn't he? It was fear of a repetition of the French Revolution that inspired such paranoia. It's paranoia. Prince Metternich, the conservative statesman of the Austrian Empire who devoted his career to trying to maintain the status quo, called the network of secret societies a real power, all the more dangerous as it works in the dark, undermining all parts of the social body and depositing everywhere the seeds of a moral gangrene which is not slow to develop and increase. It's called Fabian socialism. Only close cooperation between the great powers of Europe, he told Tsar Alexander I in December 1820, could ward off the threat. The whole of Europe was being undermined. Among peoples which are sick, remarked one of Metternich's allies in 1815, you find conspiracies. So you've got to be sick, haven't you? Going back to Kevin Galilei last week, he thinks it started in 1945. Yeah. Have they increased since the advent of the internet? Well, the assassination of US President John F. Kennedy in November 1963 immediately became the object of an enormous number of theories. For instance, long before the internet came into our lives, within months of the assassination, nearly half of all Americans polled thought that Lee Harvey Oswald had not acted alone. By 1983, this proportion had climbed to 80%. If anything, the advent of the internet has actually reduced the prevalence of conspiracy theories about the death of the president, which towards the end of 2013, 50 years on, were believed by 62% of Americans. Well, I actually heard it was 90%. About a year and a half ago. To come to my third point, conspiracy theories aren't always or necessarily wrong. Many were no mere fantasies, but had, and sometimes still have, a basis in the truth. A central part of our project looks at the relationship between theories and conspiracies. In the 1820s, secret societies did indeed proliferate. In our own time, some conspiracies about key events have turned out to be true. Now listen to how they spin this. The destruction of New York's Twin Towers in 2001 was the result of a conspiracy within Al-Qaeda. The break into the Democratic Party headquarters in the Watergate Hotel in 1972 was the result of a conspiracy hatched in President Nixon's Oval Office. Well, see, that's the truthful bit in there. And then this. The bombs that went off in London on July 7, 2005 were the result of a conspiracy devised by British terrorists. Interesting use of words, isn't it? Because the British terrorists are actually in Parliament. I wonder if he realises that. It doesn't mention Muslims here. Interesting, eh? Are they then an inevitable product of democracy, where everyone is free to put forward an explanation of major current events? In fact, we know that conspiracy theories have also been widespread in dictatorships and authoritarian regimes. Hitler banned all political groups apart from the Nazi Party and forced all organisations, including the press and news media, to close down or be turned into Nazi organisations. Well, the same thing's happening here, isn't it? Forcing his critics and opponents to go underground and work conspiratorially, even if it was only to produce leaflets and pamphlets for secret distribution during the night, or merely to keep the flame of communism or socialism burning until better times came. Where open dissent and criticism are impossible, the only way to oppose the government is by forming a secret society or a conspiracy. So people listen to this, myself and all the other radio hosts, etc. We're all secret societies, according to this guy, and conspiring against the government. Fine. History is littered with secret plots to overthrow democratic political systems too, notably in the 60s and 70s with the coup d'etat that established military regimes in many South American countries. But the very existence of a dictatorship or an authoritarian regime acts as a spur to its enemies to get together behind the scenes to overthrow it. Yet when we look back at the numerous examples in history of the assassination of leading political figures, we find that most of them have involved lone individuals rather than groups of conspirators, even if they have been acting in the name of some wider ideology. Well, this guy's obviously a fool, isn't he? What does he expect? Does he expect the British government to come charging down and stick us all with pikes or something? No, they get other people to do it. Often it seems to many people impossible to believe this fact. Hence the conspiracy theories that have followed the assassination of JFK or around the burning down of the Reichstag on February 27, 1933, an event which is well documented as absolute fact that Hitler burnt it down himself. To come to the final point on my list, conspiracy theories can take on a variety of forms and structures. In order to keep the aims, purposes, methods and membership of a conspiracy secret, it's important that as few people are involved as possible. Police forces and agents of those against whom conspiracies are directed have frequently tried to infiltrate them. So conspiracies have tried to ensure the loyalty of their members by the threat of retaliation against possible traitors. Well, it's about time the police started to infiltrate the government. The reductio ad absurdum of this is to be found in G.K. Chesterton's satirical novel The Man Who Was Thursday, where all the members of a supposed terrorist plot to turn out to be police agents. Well, G.K. Chesterton knew a lot more than this kind of stuff. He knew all about eugenics and all the rest of it and what these people were up to, and he wrote about it. In early modern Europe and well into the 19th century, conspiracies cemented the loyalty of members through sacred oaths and initiation ceremonies. Indeed, in German, the term for conspiracy is Verschwörung, a collective oath-taking, as in the French conjuration and its equivalents in Spanish and Italian. Whether or not the oaths were religious, they owed a great deal to the rites and initiation ceremonies through which artisan guilds and confraternities sought to bind their members to the maintenance of proper standards of craftsmanship and other essential aspects of their trade. Practices parodied in the supposed ritual practice of witches' covens, another form of conspiracy widely believed in during the 16th and 17th century. He says artisan guilds and confraternities. Why don't he just say the Masons and save himself a lot of words? Because maybe he's not allowed to say the Masons, eh? A lot remains to be done in researching the history, structure and dynamics of conspiracy theories, the relationship with real conspiracies and the changes they have undergone through time. It's easy to be alarmist and suggest they are a threat to democracy and to confidence and trust in democratic political systems, but there have been relatively few times in democratic countries where this has really been the case. The McCarthy period in post-war America, which arguably reduced the possibility of democratic dissent and restricted the range of political opinions it was legitimate to express, could be said to have been one. But the mere proliferation of such theories is surely not a threat in itself. Well, I just read out the one about the European Union, where it doesn't make any difference what you vote for. You do as you're told. So, you're not allowed to express political opinions, are you? You're certainly not going to be listened to. The fact that some people believe that men never landed on the moon isn't going to undermine the American political system or any other, and the widespread belief among Republicans that President Obama is not American is an expression rather than a cause of the divisions now affecting America's public life and political institutions. Now here's David Icke getting his bit in again. Few people in the end believe that we are ruled by alien lizards in disguise. It's only where conspiracy theories are directed at long-term trends rather than specific incidents or single observable phenomena, as in the case of global warming, that there seems to be no easily obtainable resolution to the clash of opinion. And even here, the overwhelming consensus of scientists and experts is solidly behind the conclusion that global warming is happening and is a product of man-made climate change. So there's a bit of propaganda thrown in there as well for climate change. The debate goes on, but it's not a case of conspiracy theories threatening democracy, whatever else it might be. By themselves, such theories may reinforce political suspicion and prejudice, but they are not the origin of it. No, the government's the origin of the suspicion and prejudice, because they cause it. Right, and talking about television and TV licence in the BBC. Watching TV has no benefit for toddlers. Well, it's no benefit for anybody. Children who spend longer in front of the screens perform worse academically. Surprise, surprise, because they're told a load of BS, aren't they? Professor Lynn Murray says sets left on in the background can be harmful. American Academy of Pediatrics advises under-twos watching television. Advises against under-twos watching television, sorry. Effects are mitigated if parents talk through what is happening on screen. Toddlers who watch lots of TV do worse at school, and even sets left on in the background can be harmful, a leading expert has warned. Lynn Murray, a professor of developmental psychology, said that 2 large-scale reviews from the US made it absolutely clear that watching television has no benefits for under-twos. And if you look at the research in detail, children who spend a lot of time in front of the screen have poorer vocabulary and do worse academically, even when other factors such as socio-economic class and parenting are taken into account. Well, that's because they're like zombies when they're sat in front of it. In a new book, The Psychology of Babies, Professor Murray said that the respected American Academy of Pediatrics advises against under-twos watching TV at all. Not only are loud, fast-moving programs difficult for the young mind to follow, they can disrupt play and prevent children interacting with siblings and parents. Of course, isn't that what they want? Even a television set left on in the background can be damaging. Speaking at her book launch, the professor said if you look at the effect of television just being on in the background and the children playing on the floor, the focus of attention is likely to be less good. However, these are mitigating things. If you sit down and watch the television alongside your child, if you talk them through what's happening, that definitely mitigates any negative consequences. Yeah. Well, how about talking them through the 9 o'clock news where they're showing you our brave soldiers killing unarmed civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan and explaining the negative consequences of that. Watching the same programme over and over is also helpful, as it gives developing brains time to process the information and anticipate what's going to happen next. However, a lot of children's TV is badly made. Oh no, it's not. It's very, very well made for the purpose it's intended. Professor Murray of Reading University said, a lot of children's television is so poorly designed it could do better. I bet it could. Loud and flashing and fast things, and we know from studies that children's attention is not able to grasp things happening that quickly. Despite her concerns, she is not in favour of an outright ban. She said, if you've got a depressed mother who is at her wit's end and she needs a break for half an hour to have a cup of tea, I definitely wouldn't be the one to say don't put the television on. Well, it's probably the television that's depressed her in the first place. The professor also gave advice on how best to get babies into a sleep routine, says that reading to a child is one of the best ways of boosting its brain power, and that its brain power. And that the first 2 years of life provide the foundations of everything from sociability to IQ, and that's why they stick all the vaccines in them before they're 2 years old, to stop that happening. Welcome back to Reality Bites Radio, 23rd of June. We were talking off air there in the last break about hay fever, and just the other day, what was it, Saturday, it was pretty horrendous here. I do get hay fever. It was pretty horrendous, but then Sunday, nothing at all. I was out walking the same route as I normally walk out in the countryside, through the fields of wheat and all the rest of it. Not a problem. So it's a bit more than hay fever, isn't it? I think we're all well aware of that. But here's the spin from the Express, just to get it through to us that we're all going to be sneezing and coughing and rubbing our eyes with all the chemicals that get sprayed into the atmosphere, I suppose. But they're going to blame it on hay fever. Heatwave Britain to face hay fever health. We're getting a heatwave as well, apparently, according to these guys. They just know it. The surgeon pollen set to double number of sufferers. You've either got hay fever or you don't. It can't just double just because there's more pollen around. If you've got an allergy, you've got an allergy. If you've not, you don't. So there's obviously more to this than meets the nose, as it were. Britain's hay fever. Britain faces a hay fever epidemic this summer with a record amount of sufferers seeking medical help. The number of patients visiting their GPs with sneezes, running noses and itchy eyes is more than double last year's figure. And as the mercury soars to 77 this week, the situation will only get worse. Experts at the charity Allergy UK say Britain now has one of the highest rates in the world for the condition. Am I right to them? Scientific Director Professor Jean Emberline said this year's hay fever season will be particularly severe due to the mild winter and warm spring. She said, as soon as the grass got a really nice dry day, the pollen counts went shooting up to high and very high, and they have been there on dry, warm days ever since. Well, that's nonsense, because it was nice and hot and sunny on Sunday, and not a sniffle from me. We are going to get these counts carry on through June and into the first couple of weeks in July. We currently have ideal conditions for pollen, and that is reflected in GP consultations, who are misdiagnosed them as hay fever sufferers, obviously. An official survey of 72 GP practices with 800,391 patients on their books found 11,873 seeking help for hay fever type symptoms. Hay fever type symptoms, not hay fever. They had symptoms similar, up from 5,568 in the same week last year. The figures come from the Royal College of General Practitioners. Well, if it's got Royal in this, you know who they're working for. Practitioners Research and Surveillance Centre, which monitors trends in diseases. They're doing a good job, aren't they? Maureen Baker, chairwoman of the college, said each year seasonal hay fever causes untold misery to thousands of people across the country, especially when we all want to enjoy the warm weather. While in some cases it may be necessary to see a doctor, especially if the symptoms persist, there are many antihistamine medications that can be bought over the counter that should provide effective relief. Well, I don't take any of them either. Patients who suffer from hay fever can also take simple steps to help minimise their exposure to pollen, such as wearing a hat with a wide brim and sunglasses and applying Vaseline to nostrils to help trap pollen particles. Grass pollen is the most common cause of hay fever and tends to affect people every year from around May to July. Tree pollen usually affects people from March to May, and weed pollen from early spring to early autumn. So you can get it all year round now. Cells on the line of the nose and eyes react to pollen by releasing histamine and other chemicals, causing inflammation in the nose, rhinitis, and eyes conjunctivitis. Sometimes the sinuses and throat are affected. Children aged between 5 and 14 suffer the most, closely followed by young people from 15 to 24. Dr. Obagi Eddie Gerry from Public Health England said anyone who experiences serious symptoms should speak to their GP for advice or call NHS 111. Dun, dun, dun. Right. And here we have more. Sharp rise in cancers caused by lifestyle. Alcohol, obesity and legacy of sunshine holidays are to blame, warn experts. Obesity, smoking and holidays in the sun fueling sharp rise in cancers. Instances of liver, mouth, womb, kidney and skin cancer rocketed since 2003, and they're blaming it on sunny weather. It never happened before. We had sunny weather before. Men diagnosed with liver cancer rose by 70% and women 60%. In 2002 to 13, skin cancer up 61%, mouth cancer up 48%, womb cancer 31%, and kidney 46%. I bet they really love the womb cancer one. Drinking, smoking, obesity and a legacy of holidays in the sun are fueling a sharp rise in cancers. Unhealthy lifestyle choices have led to rocketing instances of the disease striking the liver, mouth, womb, kidney and skin since 2003, figures show. Liver cancer has shown the biggest increase, leaping by 66%, while skin cancer increased by 61%. Cancers of the mouth rose by 48%, womb cancer 31% and kidney cancer 46%. Experts say each of these forms of the disease can be linked. It isn't necessarily linked, but it just can be, if they decide to link it, to obesity, smoking or alcohol, and are now warning that the stark increases should serve as a wake-up call for the public to make lifestyle changes and take precaution in the sun. Figures released by the Office for National Statistics, a bunch of liars that they are, for the period 2003 to 2012 show that the rates of all forms of the disease have increased by 27%, partly due to the UK's ageing population. It's all their fault for getting old. It is also being blamed on poor lifestyles. And stark regional variations show that people in the north are 10% more likely to get the illness than those in the south. Well, that's because they're poorer. Professor John Newton of Public Health England, the government body responsible for health protection and improvement, said the recent increases in liver and melanoma cancers are of particular concern, as are the regional differences. This shows how unhealthy behaviours can lead directly to increased rates of cancer. So you have to stay out in the sun, not get your vitamin D, and that'll make you alright, eh? Professor Nicola Smith, Head Information Officer at Cancer Research UK, who get a hell of a lot of money to research something that's easily curable. This sharp increase in liver cancer is extremely worrying, but it's still a relatively uncommon cancer, and there are clear lifestyle changes people can make to lower their risk. Cutting down on alcohol and not smoking can lower your risk, as can taking precautions against hepatitis C infection, like not sharing needles and practicing safe sex. Just throw in your bit of contraception in the way. She added, the explosion as package holidays to hot European beaches dating from the late 60s is probably part of the reason malignant melanoma rates continue to go up, as the disease can take decades to develop. Unfortunately, the diet for suntan, often the result of damaging sunburn, has left a legacy that's still with us today, and it's been widely promoted by the papers, television, magazines, etc, etc, etc. Data for liver cancer show that rates for men rose by 70% and 60% in women. There are now nearly 2,500 cases of disease in England and Wales every year. There's nearly 70 million people in this country, apparently. So it's hardly a huge number, is it? Because it is usually diagnosed too late, only 1 in 20 will survive beyond 5 years. The ONS also observed that the rates of mouth and throat cancers linked to smoking and alcohol had increased by 50% in men and 40% in women. There are now just over 6,600 cases a year compared to 4,456 in 2003. Well, probably something to do with all the chemicals they're breathing in on a daily basis getting sprayed from the sky again. Womb cancer, which is triggered by smoking and obesity, also how does smoking and obesity affect your womb? Also rose by 46%, and the illness now affects about 7,000 women annually. The figures also showed a sharp rise in the rates of malignant melanoma, the deadliest form of skin cancer, of 78% in men and 48% in women. Researchers say this is a legacy of the 1960s package holiday boom, when many of those who are now being diagnosed are going abroad for the first time. Tragically, a lack of awareness about the dangers of UV rays meant that many travellers allowed themselves to get sunburn in the hope of returning with a healthy tan. Or do you think anybody deliberately goes out and gets sunburn? They'd have to be pretty insane, wouldn't they? For anybody that's been sunburned knows it's not nice. Statistically, 1 in 3 people will get cancer at some point in their life. It used to be 1 in 500 or something, or more. So what's changed? It's not just a bit of smoking and drinking and a bit of sunshine, is it? 1 in 3 people will get cancer at some point in their life, but experts say the risks can be drastically reduced by taking simple steps to alter their lifestyles. Yeah, just stay away from the doctor and don't believe a word they tell you. John Newland, Senior Information Nurse at the charity Macmillan Cancer Support, said, we can reduce our risk significantly for certain cancers by just changing our lifestyle. This includes keeping a healthy weight, more exercise, keeping alcohol intake to recommended guidelines and not smoking. Historically, tobacco is one of the biggest causes, but as this is now going down, it has been replaced by obesity. Obesity for certain cancers is a major risk factor, but the good news is by losing weight, people can reduce their chances. The report published by the ONS yesterday states, since 2003 there have been large increases in the number of registrations of liver, oral, uterine, that's womb, and kidney cancers, and malignant melanoma of the skin. These cancers are strongly linked to lifestyle choices, blah blah blah. A key part of this is helping people understand the possible signs to ensure they get the necessary tests early so treatment can be started sooner. Professor Martin Wiseman, an advisor to the World Cancer Research Fund. All these cancer research funds, and none of them can seem to come up with a cure or even any reason as to why it's happening. Has previously estimated that around 80,000 cancer cases a year could be prevented in Britain if people ate better, kept to a healthy weight and exercised more. What a genius, eh? What a genius. And there's even more. The Express 20th of June. Dementia is as great a threat as cancer, says PM David Cameron. He would know, wouldn't he? Dementia now ranks alongside cancer as one of the greatest enemies of humanity, the Prime Minister said yesterday. Well, I'd say that he's one of the greatest enemies of humanity. Look at all the people he's murdering in the Middle East right now. He called on experts from the fields of research, of research and finance to bring passion and determination to the fight against illness. Well, again, look up in the sky, David. You might just see where it's all coming from. But David Cameron warned that progress against dementia could prove painfully slow. Speaking to delegates at a dementia summit in London, Mr Cameron said there had been a market failure on drug research and development. He set out a series of steps to combat the barriers to drug development, including better collaboration among researchers, quicker access to drugs for patients, and more investment in research. So in other words, it's going to fast-track any old drug they want and stick it on the market, and you're going to have to take it if you're stupid enough. For far too long, this terrible condition has been ignored, downplayed, or accepted as a natural part of the ageing process. How often do you see any of these old politicians or royals or anything with dementia? Never. Never. Because they don't inject themselves with all the vaccines that are given to us, and they, you can be sure, eat the healthiest food on the planet. The truth is, dementia now ranks alongside cancer as one of the greatest enemies of humanity. He added, only 3 out of 101 dementia drugs developed between 1998 and 2011 came to the market. Well, that's probably because they were dangerous. I think it is clear that incentives for dementia research are not yet right. The risks are too high and the rewards are too low, and if anything, this problem is set to get more acute. Wait and see, there'll be a wonder drug comes out shortly, and everybody will be clamouring for it, because they can't get away with giving people statins anymore, because that's been exposed as a fraud. Britain will examine whether it can extend patents to drug developers have a longer period of profitable exclusivity after creating a drug, he said. Mr Cameron said, even when we develop new drugs, it can take far too long to get through to patients. It's interesting that Mr Cameron said, even when we develop drugs. What we is he talking about? Of course, it's right that any new drug should be thoroughly tested, but what we saw with HIV and AIDS in the 1980s is that when faced with a terminal condition, some patients are prepared to take a chance on new treatment. So you've all to be guinea pigs. He added that more must be done to encourage global collaboration amongst researchers and pledged to write to world leaders to encourage cooperation. As I say, this guy could write a Christmas card. It will take years of patient work and progress at times. I'm sure it will be painfully slow, but we have shown with other diseases that we can, if we launch a global effort, crack these problems. I wonder what problems he's talking about. Is that Mr Galilee's perceived overpopulation problem, perhaps? Earlier, Mr Cameron told the BBC that, we love the BBC, don't we? That more must be done to improve the lives of victims. That probably means killing them. We need to make sure dementia friendliness is not just about hospitals and care homes. It's also about banks, building societies, public transport, making sure that you can help provide people who have dementia by living as normal a life as possible. Last year, the UK used its presidency of the then G8 to host an international summit on dementia. Lots of people probably forgot to turn up, who knows, which ended with experts setting a global ambition to find a cure by 2025. They're just going to set a deadline and find a cure by 2025, eh? There'll be a wonder pill out in the next year or so, watch. At yesterday's follow-up event, Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt said there's a desperate need for more investment in research, adding that economic and social reasons to find a cure could not be ignored. At the event, Alzheimer's Research UK announced a £100 million research campaign, and the Medical Research Council said it was undertaking the world's biggest study into dementia, involving 2 million people. Dementia is said to cost the global economy £350 a year, and we can't have that, can we? Can't have it costing people money. And this one's from Mr Galilee. This is where his Chinese one-child policy gets you. And this was from the 14th of May. And this actually came from the site of Stephen Mosher, who I mentioned at the start of the programme. And I want to get on the programme, but this is a link that was in an article he wrote. And it's from the Express. Father kills himself after being fined for flouting China's one-child policy. A devoted father who flouted China's one-child policy has killed himself because he could not afford to pay the fine. Guangrong died in a bid to shame the authorities into giving them the education he said they deserved. The 37-year-old was heartbroken after he was slapped with a £2,000 fine for wanting to send his 4 children to school, according to his family. Because he had flouted the country's strict rules on the number of offspring, the farmer was ordered to pay the bill for the extra classes needed when he went to enrol them into school. Unable to pay the fine and determined that his children should still be educated, the proud father took his own life to embarrass the local authorities in the Chinese state where he lived into paying his family compensation, his widow said. He couldn't take it. Wu Jinmin, 36, his widow said, he said to me before he cut his wrists, what did we bring them into the world for? To be as dumb as cattle? I cannot see my children grow up uneducated. Mr. Guangrong lived in the Wantun township in southwest China's Jihu province, a backward rural area where many families are willing to flout the country's harsh one-child-only rule, seeing children as an asset, which of course they are. His suicide prompted the embarrassed local authorities to pay his widow the equivalent of £20,000 in compensation, plus the promise to buy her a house. His death could now leave a legacy of education for more children after officials decided that his offspring should attend school after all without paying a fine, and are now reported to be planning to change the policy of banning illegal kids from schools. I think they're called black children actually in China. Wu Jinmin added, they said after his death that extra births, although not encouraged, should not stop the children being educated. I wish my husband was still with me, but I think he would be happy where he is, knowing that our family will be educated after all, even if we are not. The children miss him the most. They are all very sad. You're listening to Reality Bytes on the 23rd of June, 9:05 in the evening in the UK. Right, more health and death and all that stuff. The Independent, 23rd of June. Doctors leader warns of more NHS rationing unless funding freeze ends. Rationing. We're going to ration healthcare for you. The offer that the NHS makes to patients, it's got offer in inverted commas here. It's not a service anymore. They're going to offer you something. So it's a contract. The offer that the NHS makes to patients will have to change, with greater rationing of services and a diminished ability to provide care for elderly and infirm people in their homes, unless the government ends 5 years of reduced funding and pay freezes, the leader of Britain's doctors has said. Dr. Mark Porter, chair of the Council of the British Medical Association, accused the government of being fundamentally dishonest by demanding that the health service match ever-increasing demand with flat levels of funding. And ever-increasing demand is because people are getting sicker, and they keep telling us that people are living longer, healthier lives, Speaking exclusively to the Independent on Sunday before BMA's annual representative meeting in Harrogate, Dr. Porter said the NHS was reaching the limit of what it could do with its current resources. They, the government, have to decide one way or the other. Well, we know which way they're going to decide, don't we? It'll be the other. The health service has already been forced to ration services, with treatment for conditions such as cataracts, back pain and physiotherapy services removed from NHS lists in some areas because of tightening budgets. But Dr. Porter said future rationing could threaten key government and NHS ambitions to vastly improve home care for Britain's elderly with an integration of NHS and social care services. Elderly and the infirm, which means disabled people. So there you go, another attack on the disabled and the elderly. Everybody expects the demand for that to increase. Why? Why do they expect it to increase? Do they know something they're not telling us? He said, I would expect if the boundary of what the NHS can afford to do shifts, it will shift more towards leaving people on their own unless they have a demonstrable actual medical disorder. So you've got to demonstrate you're sick now. Just like Atos, you've got to demonstrate you're well. You're sick, isn't it? It's the same thing. You've got to demonstrate you're sick before they'll treat you. The worst outcome will be to prevent the very integration of care we believe is necessary. Demand for the political parties to commit to more spending on the NHS is growing as the service shows signs of strain after 5 years of government austerity. Patient demand is increasing by an estimated 4% each year. So 4% of people are getting sicker each year, year on year. And nobody's asking why. Highlighting a recent report by the American think tank the Commonwealth Fund, which showed the NHS remained the most efficient and effective healthcare system in the world, Dr. Porter said the health service was weathering the storm but raised doubts over its ability to continue to perform well if restraints on its budget, which exceeds $100 billion, persisted into the next Parliament. Well, because it was, or perceived to be, the most efficient and effective healthcare system in the world, is why it's been taken down. Because we don't want healthy people, we want sick people, so the big pharma companies can make a lot more money before they finally bump you off. Already 1 in 3 NHS hospitals run a financial deficit, and the NHS in England as a whole is expected to face a deficit of $2 billion next year and $30 billion by 2021. Key waiting time targets for patients with suspected cancer and GP referrals for specialist treatment have been missed already this year. The number of people visiting A&E has reached record highs, and many are having to wait more than the targeted 4 hours to be seen. Dr Porter, who works as a consultant and anaesthetist at the University Hospitals Coventry and Warwickshire NHS Trust, said the signs of what Labour has termed a summer crisis were worrying. Winter crises are caused by the increase in demand because of temporary increases in illnesses and accidents, he said. This crisis is coming a few months into the financial year. It's reasonable to suppose that because this year's funding targets are tighter than last year's. Every NHS provider is responding differently. Some will have a recruitment freeze, others will be closing beds, all designed to control costs. No, designed to kill people. The common feature is that you reduce capacity. If you reduce capacity with increasing demand, you end up with a crisis. Well, never let a good crisis go to waste, eh? Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, says the NHS can save yet more money by providing safer care and avoiding litigation costs. That's his big idea. Take more care of people and make sure you don't get sued. Well, don't get caught, really. I think that's what he's saying. While Labour's Andy Burnham says it must focus more on preventative care in the home before the taxpayer is asked for more money. Well, how about preventative care in every walk of life? Like getting the garbage food off the supermarket shelves, stop giving people vaccines and all the rest of it. And you wouldn't have sick people, would you? Well, not as many, that's for sure. However, Dr Porter warned any future Labour government against another top-down reorganisation of the NHS, because it affects his job, saying that prescribing from Whitehall had left the service in chaos during the Coalition's health reforms, which finally came into effect last year as an estimated cost of $3 billion. Dr Dan Poulter, a health minister, said the NHS is on track to make $20 billion savings this Parliament to reinvest into frontline care. And we are confident it will continue to make the savings necessary to meet rising demand. Well, there's not actually more. They're supposedly saving $20 billion, but they're going to spend it. Well, how does that work? We've taken tough decisions to protect the NHS budget, which is allowing us to strengthen family doctoring, reform out-of-hospital care and improve GP access for 7.5 million people across the country. We are also acting now to integrate health and social care through the $3.8 billion Better Care Fund, a radical move towards integration of health and social care. And what else did they do with all that money they saved? Independent, 20th of June. NHS death stats can be years out of date and pose public health risk. Official statistics on deaths in England and Wales are as much as 2.5 years out of date, a coalition of doctors, scientists and charities has warned. In an open letter to David Cameron, well, maybe the guy can't read either, as well as write his Christmas cards, the group said that the public health was being put at risk because researchers must wait months and even years before thousands of deaths from suicides, drug abuse and many other causes are placed on the official register. It's funny, they choose suicides and drug abuse. What about cancer? I thought that was supposed to be the big scary thing. Why is cancer not mentioned here? It's got to be suicides or drug abuse, eh? The delays, which they call unnecessary and embarrassing, undermine research in public health and public policy development and could lead to disease epidemics being underestimated and trends in accidental and illness-related deaths being missed, they warn. The Royal Statistical Society, mental health charity SANE, Sense About Science and campaigners on drug policy and penal reform are among 8 signatories to the letter which was sent to Downing Street on Wednesday. Well, what's penal reform got to do with it? That's the prison service. Their concerns centre on deaths for which the cause needs to be established at an inquest. About 1 in 10 deaths. Inquests often take between 6 months and 2.5 years to come to a decision, in which time the death is not recorded on the National Register. So going back to what I said in the last article, better care and avoid litigation costs. Well, here you go. They're not going to do this anymore, are they? So they'll save themselves those litigation costs and just cover up the deaths and the maltreatment of patients, misdiagnoses and all the rest of it. In effect, this means these deaths are invisible to researchers. It can also muddle the figures once deaths are eventually registered a year or more late. The group said that for suicide and drug-related deaths, only half of those registered in 2011 actually occurred that year, the other half occurring in previous years, but the registration delayed because of a long inquest process. Around 10,000 deaths a year in England and Wales are not registered for at least 6 months, they added, pointing out that Scotland and 23 other European countries properly and promptly count their dead. That's reassuring, isn't it? But bring out your dead, bring out your dead. But Professor Sheila Bird of the Royal Statistical Society said it beggars belief that the death registration system in England and Wales was failing such a basic test. It doesn't matter. If somebody has to go to an inquest, they're still dead. Surely it's just a matter of ticking a box and say, this person's died. You know. It's not rocket science, is it? A whole range of studies in the public interest that help to protect the public health rely fundamentally on knowing who has died and when, she said. By failing properly to count the dead, discoveries that these studies should make are delayed or undermined. It is reprehensible because it is so readily avoided by legislative change. No, just get a piece of paper and a pencil and write it down. Scotland and most developed nations in Europe manage this. Why not England and Wales? Because they're taking you down, folks. Warnings over delays were first made during the swine flu pandemic of 2009. You know, that non-event whereby one person on the whole planet was actually properly diagnosed as having caught this flu from a pig, which he was in intimate contact with. I don't mean intimate in the sexual sense, but he was a pig farmer. And he's the only actual provable case on the planet. Said the Chief Medical Officer recommended action the following year. But pressure groups Sense About Science accused the government of delays and foot dragging. The letter calls on the Prime Minister to introduce urgent legislation to ensure all deaths are registered promptly, warning that the delays could jeopardise the public health community's response to future disease outbreaks. Epidemics could be underestimated if unexpected deaths from a new disease are not registered immediately, the letter states. If it's a new disease, surely they know it's a bit dodgy. With timely registration, it is easier to track an epidemic and to understand the lethality of the disease if researchers can at least know quickly the ages and locations of people who are dying. Well, surely they'll know, because the dead body will be in the hospital. But anyway, getting back to sunshine. The Express, Jo Wiley, she's always one to write about these scare stories and so-called health issues and wonder pills and all the rest of it. But here she goes again. Sunbathing as addictive as heroin, say researchers. So if you're sunbathing, you're compared to a heroin addict. Sun worshippers who love to bake for hours on the beach may have an addiction to tanning. Sunshine acts on their bodies in the same way as hard drugs, such as heroin, researchers claim. The ultraviolet rays from the sun stimulate the production of endorphins, the so-called feel-good hormones. Well, that's right. Anybody knows that. If you go out in the sun, a nice warm sunny day, and you get it on your face and skin, you feel great. And that's why they don't want you doing it. Spending all day on the deck chair can satisfy your craving for the sunshine fix in much the same way as an addict craves drugs. Dr. David Fisher of Harvard Medical School in the US said this information might serve as a valuable means of educating people to curb excessive sun exposure in order to limit skin cancer risk as well as accelerated skin aging that occurs with repeated sun exposure. Our findings suggest that the decision to protect our skin or the skin of our children may require more of a conscious effort rather than a passive preference. Yeah, lather them in suntan lotion that's going to give them cancer. How about that? Dr. Fisher and his team, whose findings appear in the journal Cell, found that after a week in artificial sunshine, endorphin levels in the blood of shaved mice increased and they later suffered withdrawal symptoms. But British experts last night cast doubt on the validity of the results. Dr. Claire Stanford of University College London said, this study does not provide the sort of evidence needed to show addiction to UV light in mice. Well, we're not mice, folks, that's why. We're human. And, if anybody wants to shave me to put me out in the sunshine, they can, they're more likely to be cutting their own throats than anything on me. The strain of mice used produced virtually no melatonin, which is thought to protect against damage from UV light. Shaving such mice and exposing them to UV light also raises important ethical questions about animal welfare. Oh, God. Shaving mice. Well, I'll come on to something about dogs under the last article, actually, today, which is just as ridiculous as this. Dr. Richard Weller of Edinburgh University said, mice are nocturnal animals which avoid the light, so one must be cautious about extrapolating from these experiments to man. Exactly. But there's a solution to this, We all know that Britain doesn't get a summer unless you read about it in the Daily Express. But here is the Express again. 20th of June. No passport. Holiday at home, says Tourism Minister Helen Grant. Tourism Minister Helen Grant sparked fury last night by saying people whose holidays have been ruined by the passport fiasco could enjoy a staycation, they're called now. New word for you. At home instead. Miss Grant, who is in Brazil on government business and is planning a holiday in Spain later this year, said, I'm very confident that people will get their passports, but if they don't want to go away, we have some fantastic places to visit here. I think there's a lot to be said for the staycation. Well, the fact is they do want to go away, and that's why they've applied for a passport. You moron. The Public and Commercial Services Union claims the crisis in which a backlog of applications has soared to 480,000 was caused by job cuts. A spokesman said it is incredibly unhelpful while people are desperately trying to get hold of their passports. For ministers to be making this sort of glib remark, they should be focusing their efforts on sorting out the problem in the passport office. Well, they are going to sort it out, aren't they? We're all going to get ID cards, because that's where this is going. And you can use it for everything. It'd be great, wouldn't it? It's all very well for her to go off to Spain while suggesting people who can't get hold of a passport should stay at home. And, well, and all the people that they've laid off won't be going on holiday either, I'm sure. Not in this country either. Mark Gander, spokesman for the Consumer Action Group, said, "It's very nice for her. She's got a passport. And I bet if she didn't, she'd be able to do so pretty quickly. It's a different story for the rest of us. When the pound is so strong, people want to make the most of it." there's a bit of blatant propaganda as well. Shadow Tourism Minister Clive Efford described Miss Grant's remarks as extraordinary and said the government has lost the plot. He's just noticed, has he? But a spokesman for the Department for Culture, Media and Sport last night tried to diffuse the row. Helen Grant was crystal clear that she was confident that people would get their passports to be able to travel overseas, he said. As Tourism Minister, it is completely right that she champions the domestic tourism market, but she was in no way linking the two issues. No, she should be trying to attract people from abroad to come here on holiday. Oh, sorry, they do that. It's called immigration, isn't it? Welcome back to Reality Bytes Radio. Now, where we go now? British homes are the smallest in Europe, study finds. It's the Telegraph on the 20th of June. Houses in Britain have less space than any other European country, new research shows. British families are living in some of the most cramped conditions in Europe, with more than half of homes falling short of minimum modern space standards, new research has found. The study found the UK has the smallest homes by floor space area of any European country, with the average new build property covered just 76 square metres, compared with almost double that amount of 137 square metres in Denmark. Well, of course, this is the old Malthusian thing that if you want to kill people off, you put them in more and more cramped conditions, and you get a prevalence of diseases. And I've just read out articles about the NHS, the cancer rates up, all the rest of it. Well, this is what happens. Researchers found that between a quarter and a third of people in the UK are dissatisfied with the amount of space in their homes, despite many properties being classed as under-occupied when being assessed by the number of bedrooms versus the number of residents. They warned that overcrowding can lead to depression, the breakdown of relationships and physical symptoms such as asthma. What's asthma got to do with it? Again, it's just another one of these allergies they're going to throw out there and blame it on anything. Obviously, living in a small house causes asthma. I don't see the link there, do you? They warned that overcrowding can lead to depression. After analysing data from 16,000 English homes, the team from the University of Cambridge found that 55% of them had less floor space than the London Housing Design Guide internal space standard. More than a fifth of the properties fell short of total space requirements when the number of occupants was taken into account. Floor space in the average British property is just 85 square metres, compared with 77 square metres in Greece, 88 square metres in Ireland and 98 square metres in the Netherlands. Flats and terraced housing most likely to be the most squeezed, according to the study. Well, Holland is the most densely populated country in the world, I believe, and yet they've still got bigger houses than we have. 25% bigger, So, in extreme cases, overcrowded homes can cause physical illnesses such as asthma and mental illnesses such as depression. Malcolm Morgan, co-author of the report, said. Less extreme cases can cause anxiety or stress or impact on children's social and emotional development. Lack of privacy resulting from lack of space can degrade family relationships and prevent residents from entertaining guests and engaging in social activities in the home. Well, surprise, surprise, eh? Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Well, can't you have me around? There's no space. We've only got one seat in the living room. That's it. Nowhere to sit. People have a strong emotional reaction to spaces, and people's perception of their homes can affect their quality of life. The findings undermine the government's bedroom tax, which penalises social housing tenants who are deemed to have spare rooms, according to the researchers. With households receiving housing benefit the most likely to be undersized, the authors of the study claim the extra bedrooms are often used for other purposes due to limited space. When the bedroom tax was introduced, there was a lot of implication that those living in houses with spare bedrooms were doing so out of selfishness. But what this research shows is that in most of the UK you simply have to under-occupy houses in order to have an acceptable amount of living space. Exactly. He added, spare bedrooms are a misconception in many homes, as lack of space means that any extra bedrooms are needed for other uses, usually storage, because I've been renting accommodation for a while now, and the houses now have no storage. If you go in a modern house these days, you're lucky to have one cupboard in the house, and it's usually under the stairs. The removal of space standards in the 1980s, the high value of land and the low number of homes built by public authorities and housing associations in recent years are all cited as reasons for the lack of space in UK properties. How about Agenda 21? Is that not cited as a reason? Mr. Morgan, a PhD student at Cambridge's Department of Engineering, said the amount of space in a home influences how residents live. Oh, what a genius. He's got a PhD, this guy. Oh, he's a student. He's a PhD student. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He's not qualified yet. For example, how and where people prepare and eat food, what furniture and activities can be accommodated, how much privacy people have, and whether necessary changes to the environment can be made if the residents' circumstances change. Like, you have a child. You know? Anyway, turn down the heating to lose weight. Cooler temperatures at home mean we have to burn calories to stay warm. So you turn the heating down and run around the house. That's supposed to be a replacement for your heating system. Sleeping in a cool room for a month could make major differences in weight management. Weight management. Adults have two types of fat, bad white fat and good brown fat. Brown fat specialises in burning off calories and generates heat. It could be a really cool way to lose weight. Researchers say that cosy, centrally heated bedrooms may be making us fat, meaning losing weight could be as simple as turning down the radiator. Something as simple as sleeping in a cool room for a month could make major difference, a US medical conference held. Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm drinking a glass of cream every morning, full fat cream, and I've lost 9 pounds in a month. So there. While the idea may seem bizarre, the researchers say warmer homes could be a hidden contributor to the obesity epidemic. Their theory hinges on the different properties of two types of fat. The troublesome white variety that we are all too familiar with soaks up extra calories and stores them in big bellies, love handles and saddlebag thighs. But adults also have a small amount of a second healthy fat. This brown fat specialises in burning off calories and generates heat as it does so. Babies have a lot of brown fats to keep them warm, and adults have more brown fat, are slimmer than those without. The Australian research suggests it's possible to make more of it simply by keeping cool. The researchers tracked the body fat composition of 5 healthy men for 4 months. During the day, the men went about their lives as usual, but at night they sat and slept in temperature-controlled rooms in a research centre. For the first month, the temperature was kept at 24°C. This is described as thermoneutral, meaning the body doesn't have to work to produce or lose heat. The temperature was cut to 19 centigrade for the second month, put back to 24 for the third, and turned to 27 for the fourth. The amount of brown fat rose when sleeping in indoor cool conditions and fell when it was warm. Irrespective of the season, the ICE Endo 2014 annual conference in Chicago held. The amount of calorie burning brown fat increased by up to 40% during the cool month. It then fell when the heating was turned back up to normal levels before falling even further in the 27-degree conditions. Well, I had my heating on in the winter, and I never had it up at 24 degrees because that's just too warm in your house. I don't know why we'd have it that high. But anyway, never mind. Dr. Lee of the Garvan Institute of Medical Research in Sydney said the big unknown in this study was whether or not we could actually manipulate brown fat to grow and shrink in a human being. So manipulating fat now. What we found was that the cold month increased brown fat by around 30-40%. The brown fat didn't just keep the men warm when it was cool indoors, it also made it easier for their bodies to process sugar. This could help in the development of new treatments for diabetes. Dr. Lee said that the widespread use of central heating may be stopping us from making valuable brown fat. In other words, keep running about, keep warm. Anyway, so in addition to unhealthy diet and physical activity, it is tempting to speculate that the subtle shift in temperature exposure could be a contributing factor to the rise in obesity. So turn down the heating or you get obese. That's the excuse for that. And it's the same nonsense. You've got good and bad cholesterol and all that rubbish. It's the more cholesterol you have in your head, the better your brain is. It's as simple as that. The Guardian, of course, The Guardian, EU mulls cutting energy use by 35%. Just coincidentally, at the same time as these garbage articles come out about running around your house to keep warm. Draft communication suggests Europe should set non-binding target of reducing energy consumption by 30 to 35% by 2030. To maintain Europe's emissions cutting momentum, a 30% cut in energy use is needed by 2030, rising to 35% if the EU wants to reap the benefits of energy security, jobs and growth. What's jobs got to do with it? And says a draft communication for the bloc's energy efficiency review seen by Euroactiv. And do you think the energy companies will take a 30 to 35% reduction of profits? Absolutely not. They'll just put the prices up by 30 to 35% to compensate, won't they? The target would be indicative or non-binding on member states until 2017 at least, and would be based on an absolute reduction in primary energy consumption of 1,312 million tonnes of oil equivalent for a 35% figure. The paper is broadly in line with findings from an impact assessment revealed by Euroactiv last week, which shows that higher efficiency targets would bring optimum levels of GDP growth, jobs, energy security and emission cuts, but no agreement on a final goal to complement a planned 40% greenhouse gas emissions cut was reached at a meeting between the EU President, José Manuel Barroso, and a cabinet of top commissioners on 18th of June. Oh, top commissioners, eh? That's those people you never voted for. Barroso himself is thought sympathetic to a robust 2030 energy savings target and is said to have given a green light to the energy and climate commissioners. Of course, well, he's a good-hardened communist, isn't he? He'd love it. Günther Oettinger and Connie Hedegaard to push for a higher headline figure than 25%. A number in the 30 to 35% range remains firmly in play. This faces strong opposition through from the EU's Secretary-General Catherine Day, a key power in the current Commission regime, who's holding out for 25 to 27 energy-saving goals on grounds of cost effectiveness. See, they go for a 30 to 35%, and then they'll compromise and come down to 25%. Simple as that, and they'll get exactly what they wanted. The position is grounded in upfront investment costs, a particular form of modelling, and parts of the 2030 impact assessment which anticipates citizens taking low-carbon investment decisions on the basis of €40 per tonne carbon price by 2030 in the 40% of Europe's industry that the ETS covers. So we're all going to be buying carbon credits, are we? Yeah? Environmentalists argue that this is ivory tower thinking because it assumes that the carbon price will one day drive homeowners to renovate their houses and farmers to change their livestock. Speaking at a German-Danish 2030 Targets workshop on 18th June, the Green MEP Claude Turmes simply asked, where is the political majority for that sort of carbon price? Recent attempts to modestly raise the cost of allowances provoked strong reaction from business lobbies, and even though the current price of around £5 a tonne is far too low to affect investments in energy efficiency or renewables. So it's all about pushing up the price of these invisible bags of carbon gas. You know, utter nonsense. Mail Online, 17th of June. And, if they want to save carbon, here's a solution. But apparently if you speak out, you get sacked. Atomic scientist reaches out-of-court settlement with government after claiming he was sacked to discredit his work, which he believed could stop global warming. Dr. Mikhail Gryaznovich sued the UK Atomic Energy Authority after sacking, argued it was because his fusion research found solution to global warming. I was invited to come to the UK to do this research, which led to the UK's own fusion programme. Now I've been fired for pursuing this research. Employment Tribunal ended suddenly today after parties agreed settlement. A scientist working on a new power source has agreed an out-of-court settlement with Britain's Atomic Agency after claiming they sacked him because his research could halt global warming. Dr. Mikhail Gryaznovich believes small fusion machines known as tokamaks could be the answer to providing clean and plentiful electricity, but he sued the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority after claiming bosses suppressed his work, bullied him and then sacked him in a bid to discredit him and his work. The agency, who said he was making unsupported claims about his work for financial reasons, settled with him today. The Russian-born physicist had worked for the UK AEA for more than 22 years when he was sacked from his job working at their research facilities near Abingdon, Oxfordshire last year. I have an exemplary record as an outstanding fusion scientist and innovator, he told the tribunal. I have tried to do my duty to the UK, giving all my experience and capability to promote the faster way to fusion energy. I was invited to come to the UK to do this research, which has been hugely successful by any measure, and which led directly to the flagship of the UK's own fusion research programme. Now I've been fired for pursuing this research. He said in late 2012 the chief executive at UK AEA, Professor Stephen Cowley, was rude and intimidating towards him at a meeting and accused him of wrongdoing. The thing he's doing wrong is actually exposing that we don't need coal or any of that stuff, and we could all have free electricity basically, but we can't have that, can we? Well, what would the electricity companies do for their massive profits? Problems arose. He said, even worse, it appears that a Professor Cowley was attempting to stop my work because it might reveal the inconvenient truth that research on small tokamaks can help to accelerate the development of the fusion energy as a promising solution to global warming and possible shortage of energy. Now, regardless of what you think of global warming, the guys obviously invented something that's that could take on the electricity companies, and they don't like it. But they're using global warming as an excuse here anyway. Fusion energy is likely to bring major global environmental benefits. Hence, suppressing a promising area of fusion research and deliberately ignoring its potential advantages is likely to cause damage to the environment in the future. Problems arose around 3 years after Dr. Grejasnovic co-founded Tokamak Solutions UK Limited, a commercial venture making small tokamaks with a view to generating electricity in years to come. He said a prior arrangement to allow him to take unpaid leave to attend conferences outside his role for the authority, a situation apparently supported by Professor Cowley, suddenly changed in late 2012 when he was told there was a conflict of interest. I still don't understand what possible potential there is for a conflict, and I don't know what damage I could have caused to the respondent. He said, I have quite reasonably asked for this information, but it has not been given to me. He was sacked in March last year and told the tribunal he had tried to encourage UK universities to become involved in tokamak research, but the Professor Cowley had tried to thwart his efforts and told the universities that the machines did not help fusion research. At the start of the tribunal hearing, Reading Berkshire, Hilary Winston, counsel for UK AEA, challenged the claimant. She said there were doubts over Dr. Grejasnovic's scientific theory, but that the authority had allowed him to conduct his work. Well, there's a big problem in the scientific theory around global warming, isn't there? But nobody's complaining about that. Ms. Winstone argued that in his bid to attract venture capitalists to fund the work, Dr. Grejasnovic had made claims about being able to generate electricity within 10 years. I bet he can do it now. He made the claims for financial gain. He didn't really believe them, she told the tribunal panel. So she's telling him what he believes. Nothing new with the global warming nutters, is it? The tribunal was sensationally halted this afternoon after Dr. Grejasnovic and the UKAE reached an out-of-court settlement over his unfair dismissal claim. The agreement means his claim was withdrawn and the case dismissed because they don't want him given the evidence, do they? Dr. Grejasnovic, 59, from Culham, Oxfordshire, who brought a scale model of the tokamak technology to the tribunal, said, "It was never about money from the very beginning. We wanted to succeed with fusion energy. We hope in the future that we will be able to work with the UKAEA. We have experiments continuing at Culham Laboratory tomorrow." Dr. David Kingham, Chief Executive of Tokamak Energy, who represented his colleague at the tribunal, added, "We are great enthusiasts for fusion and we have made a decision to get back to doing that. There are great facilities at Culham which we want to work with as and when we can." So, that's that. They've obviously paid him off. And he's still got his job, hasn't he? So there you go. Welcome to the last quarter of an hour of Reality Bytes Radio on the 23rd of June. And just a few comment in there from Peace in Your Garden. We are lucky we should be in an ice age. How could we cope then? How would we cope then? Well, we're technically still in an ice age. We're still coming out of the last one. And if these maniacs in the green movement get their way, they could well spray us back into one, the way they're going on. But anyway, Greenpeace. Anybody listening to the show knows I've got no time for these zealots whatsoever. Well-funded zealots as well. Greenpeace losses. Leaked documents reveal extent of financial disarray. Emails and meetings notes show group's finance department has a long history of problems in its handling of its £58 million budget. Now, where did they get that? They don't get that from shaking cans in the street. The handling of Greenpeace International's £58 million budget has been in disarray for years, with its finance team beset by personal problems and a lack of rigorous processes, leading to errors, substandard work and a souring of relationships between its Amsterdam HQ and offices around the world. Documents and emails leaked to The Guardian show. Interesting, they've got their head office in Amsterdam, eh? I wonder what they do there at the weekends. The revelations would come after it emerged that a staffer lost $3 million on the foreign exchange market betting mistakenly on a weak euro, revealed the group's finance department has faced a series of problems, and its board is troubled at the lack of controls and lapses that allowed one person to lose so much money. Well, it wasn't one person. I read that article on air a couple of weeks ago. Greenpeace, which prides itself on being largely funded by relatively small individual donations, £58 million worth of small donations, right, apologised to supporters for the loss, claiming that serious error of judgment was a result of a single staff member acting beyond the limits of their authority and without following proper procedures. Well, didn't Julia Middleton say that people were to act beyond the limits of their authority? She called her book Beyond Authority, didn't she? I've got it on the shelf here. But the documents show that internally the group is worried about the organisational failings that allowed it to happen. Minutes of a board meeting in the spring this year say the board takes this £3 million loss very seriously and is deeply concerned that there should be such financial loss at a time of transition when reserves are stretched and income is substantially lower than projected. It's substantially lower than projected and it's 58 million quid. I wonder how much they were expecting. And it is particularly troubled by how it happened, i.e. the lack of strong, coherent processes and controls that prevent the possibility that contracts can be entered into without due authorisation. Greenpeace is one of the biggest and most high-profile environmental campaigning groups with more than 2,000 employees globally and thousands more volunteers. It's based in Amsterdam and has 28 offices around the world that campaign and fundraise independently, including Greenpeace UK, which earlier this year successfully sent 6 activists to climb to the top of the Shard, Europe's tallest building, to send a message opposing Shell's plans for oil drilling in the Arctic. Oh, so there's your PR piece. It was The Guardian, of course, promoting Greenpeace. The group's public face and top campaigner, Executive Director Kumi Naidu, admits that internal communications are a huge problem. Yeah, they probably keep getting leaked. Naidu, who was previously an apartheid campaigner, says staff have good reason to be upset at a range of problems. That's interesting. Naidu, who was previously an apartheid campaigner, he wasn't an anti-apartheid campaigner, apparently, so he must have agreed with it. Staff were concerned at being shifted from Amsterdam on Dutch wages to national offices on lower local wages as part of a major restructuring effort to decentralise the group. The group did not campaign to have one of its 3 ships, the Arctic Sunrise, released by Russia because the political circumstances would have made it a wasted effort. The Guardian, well, if they hadn't tried to climb aboard an oil rig, Russia wouldn't have seized it, would they? If they hadn't acted like terrorists. The Guardian has also learned that one of the group's most senior executives, Pascal Husting, Greenpeace International's international programme director, works in Amsterdam but flies between the city's offices and his home in Luxembourg several times a month. He's very environmentally friendly, isn't he? I'll come on to that in the next article. Naidu defended the arrangement, saying Pascal has a young family in Luxembourg. When he was offered the new role, he couldn't move his family to Amsterdam straight away. He'd be the first to say he hates the commute, hates having to fly, but right now he hasn't got much of an option until he can move. He wishes there was an express train between his home and his office, but it would currently be a 12-hour round trip by train. The loss of £3 million paid out earlier this year comes as the group is already dealing with lower than expected income, despite the Arctic 30 incident last year, which, when dozens of its activists and several journalists were imprisoned by Russia last year over a protest at oil drilling in the Arctic. So you see, it was all a money-making scam by them to get publicity. That's all it was. No interest in the environment. Just a fraud, folks. That's all they are. Greenpeace International has said it will soon report a $5.4 million deficit, which includes the $3 million for 2013. I guess that's $3 million less they can pay on prostitutes in Amsterdam's red light district, I guess, and exotic cheroots. Mike Townsley, the group's head of communications, told AP last week of the $3 million loss that hindsight is 2020. But we believe if he, the individual who made the transactions, had followed rules and procedures, this wouldn't have happened. Well, somebody else would have stolen it, wouldn't they? Anyway, The Telegraph, 23rd of June. Greenpeace executive flies 250 miles to work. Environmental group campaigns to curb growth in air travel, but defends senior executive commuting 250 miles to work by plane. One of Greenpeace's most senior executives routinely commutes 250 miles to work by plane, despite the environmental group's campaign to curb air travel has emerged. Just hypocrites, aren't they? Absolute hypocrites. Pascal Husting, Greenpeace International Programme Director, flies between the organisation's offices in Amsterdam and his home in Luxembourg several times each month. Greenpeace argues for curbs on the growth in aviation, which it says is ruining our chances of stopping dangerous climate change. Well, there's a lot of aviation up there causing climate change, and Greenpeace knows all about it. Each round-trip commute Mr. Husting's made would give him a carbon footprint of an estimated 142 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions. I want somebody in Greenpeace to show me a bag of carbon dioxide on a scale and weigh it for me. And then I'll believe you that carbon dioxide has a weight that you can clearly discern. Because you can't tell us it's lighter than air and then put it on a scale. Just doesn't work, does it? And as Shiziz mentioned last week, it isn't lighter than air, and that's why it stays down here and feeds the plant life. It's so simple. One Greenpeace volunteer on Monday described Mr. Husting's travel arrangements as almost unbelievable, while another said they were cancelling their direct debit payment to support Greenpeace in light of a series of revelations about the organisation. Good. The head of Greenpeace in the UK on Monday denied that it has lost its integrity, despite the disclosure and claims of organisational disarray and financial mismanagement at the campaign group. I think it's called fraud. Greenpeace was last week forced. It's not just financial fraud. Their whole outlook on the world is a fraud. Greenpeace was last week forced to apologise for a serious error of judgment after it emerged that it lost £3 million of public donations when a member of staff took part in an unauthorised currency dealing. Writing in a blog, John Sovin, Executive Director of Greenpeace UK, said, "As for Pascal's air travel, well, it's really a tough one. Was it the right decision to allow him to use air travel to try to balance his job with the needs of his family for a while? For me, it feels like it gets to the heart of a really big question. What kind of compromises do you make in your efforts to try to make the world a better place?" They've got a £58 million budget, but this guy's got to write in a blog, eh? I think there's a line there. Honesty and integrity to the values that are at the heart of the good you're trying to do in the world cannot be allowed to slip away. Well, you never had any honesty and integrity in the first place, Greenpeace, I'm sorry to say. For what it's worth, I don't think we've crossed that line here at Greenpeace. You've certainly not crossed the line into honesty and integrity, that's for sure. But Richard Lancaster, who said he had been volunteering with Greenpeace since 1980s, responded, I volunteer with Greenpeace but work in the commercial world, and if I took a job in another country, I'd expect to move to where the job is, and if I couldn't, for family reasons, I wouldn't take the job. So I find Pascal's travel arrangements almost unbelievable. Another respondent to Mr. Sauvin's blog, which also addresses concerns over Greenpeace's mismanagement, wrote, so disappointed, hardly had 2 pennies to rub together, but I've supported Greenpeace for 35 plus years, cancelling direct debit for a while. Greenpeace campaigns to curb the growth in polluting air travel and end needless domestic flights. Well, they want to try stopping all these military flights. Maybe that would help. In a briefing on the problems with aviation, the group says, in terms of its damage to the climate, flying is 10 times worse than taking the train. Kumi Naidu, Greenpeace's top executive director, said that while Mr. Hustings wishes there was an express train between his home and his office, it would currently be a 12-hour round trip by train. He told The Guardian, Pascal has a young family in Luxembourg, blah, 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 blah. Greenpeace argues that it does not want to stop people from flying. Oh yes it does, but it does want to prevent the number of flights from growing to dangerous levels. Well, as I say, how about grounding all these military flights, because they're probably about half of them. Last Saturday, not Saturday just past, Saturday before, the sky was like a chessboard here, with trails every which way, in every direction. And this Saturday, you could hardly spot a plane in the sky anywhere, and no trails. So, Greenpeace, look up in the sky now and again. Greenpeace argues that it doesn't want to stop people from flying. It alleges that flying remains largely the preserve of the wealthy, citing a study showing cheap flights haven't created better access to air travel for the poor. They've just allowed people with more money to fly more often. What a joke. Right, and this last one is just getting so ridiculous, the Big Brother Society. But listen to this. The Telegraph, 23rd of June. Frisbee is a health and safety risk for dogs, Kennel Club claims. Dog owners are warned not to play Frisbee with their pets as it could result in injury after Dog Show bans the sport. Extreme sports are usually thought to include dangerous activities such as bungee jumping or skydiving, but dog owners have been told to add Frisbee to the list as it presents a health and safety risk to their animals. The Kennel Club has backed a decision by a country dog show to ban Frisbee catching on the grounds that it puts pets in danger of injury. Can you believe this? The organisers of Scruff's Dog Show at Keswick, Cumbria, decided to scrap both the highest Frisbee catch and the highest biscuit catch categories amid fears for the participants' well-being. An award for the dog with the most appealing eyebrows went ahead. No, it's not April the 1st, folk. They're serious. Tony Lywood, yeah, there you go, a town councillor and one of the show's organisers, said a couple of members of our organising committee who have experience of larger scale dog shows suggested there may be risks to dogs that jump high to catch Frisbees. We did some due diligence and reluctantly agreed that we should scrap the Frisbee category and named the, I don't know what's in there, and the biscuit catching category so that the dogs are sitting down. It's a strange and bizarre decision to make, but one which I suppose we had to make if there is a risk that animals could get hurt. He added, in shows elsewhere, there have been occasions where dogs have jumped high and twisted their back, and there was one where the dog had to be put down. The Kennel Club, the country's biggest charity devoted to protecting the welfare of dogs, has twice previously named Keswick as the most dog-friendly town in the UK. A spokesman backed the decision of the show's organisers. The Kennel Club encourages fun sports and activities for dogs in order to keep them fit and healthy. But it has concerns about the game of Frisbee, particularly in its more extreme forms. Extreme Frisbee. Extreme Frisbee. Oh dear. While it can be safe in controlled conditions, if it is thrown at great heights or awkward angles, leading the dog to jump and twist, it can cause strain and injury on landing, so care should always be taken. We need to get them safety nets, eh? Hundreds of people were expected at yesterday's event held at Fitz Park, with rosettes awarded from 1st to 4th place in all categories. While apparently extreme versions of Frisbee fell by the wayside, a total of 24 categories survived, including Dog with the Best Trick, Dog looks most like its name, Dog with the Best Howling Performance, and the Best 6 Legs, Dog and Owner. Can you believe this garbage? Anyway, that's it for tonight, and we'll see you on Thursday. Awake Radio TV starts on Saturday, but we'll talk about that on Thursday. And